Good evening, everyone. My name is Eamon Scullion, and I'm the Visitor Centre and Community Benefits Officer at Trident Park Energy Recovery Facility. I'm an ex-STEM and history teacher. I was the director of the South Wales Miners Museum. My particular interest is in engaging with and explaining the relationship between industries and communities in South Wales. Today, we're going to have a look at Trident Park, or how Trident Park plays a vital role for businesses and households in South Wales, taking non-recyclable waste, diverting it from landfill, and converting it into enough electricity for approximately 65,000 homes. Wales produces around 4 million tonnes of waste every year. That's enough to fill the Principality Stadium from pitch to roof every week. So what happens to it all? This is the waste hierarchy, and it ranks the waste management options available according to what's best for the environment. It gives the highest priority to reducing, reusing and recycling waste, a message you'll be familiar with through Keep Wales Tidy or your local authority recycling schemes. But what does it mean in practice? Reducing your waste is exactly that. Try to only buy what you need and produce less waste overall. Reusing your waste means trying to use an item for more than once for its original purpose. This could be reusing jam jars or cardboard boxes and so on. It could also mean keeping larger items and electrical items in good nick, repairing them instead of replacing them. Recycling, however, means that if those two are not possible, then your waste can be used again by breaking it into its basic stuff and making a new object out of it. A really good example of this is when you've got used glass bottles, they're smashed up, melted down, and new glass objects are recast out of them. So what happens to the waste that can't be reused, reduced, or recycled? Well, before the responsibility for waste recycling and the environment would devolve to Wales, the vast majority of this waste was sent for disposal at landfill. We now use landfill diversion technologies, which don't produce the same landfill gas, which is roughly 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2 on its own. This landfill gas has to be managed at all active UK landfill sites. The modern approach for processing residual, non-recyclable waste, that's your black bag waste, in the UK is to use energy recovery processes to convert the waste into energy, such as electricity for use by the national grid. Modern ERFs play a crucial role in diverting non-recyclable waste from landfill, working alongside recycling services to ensure as comprehensive a waste management approach as possible. Byproducts of this process can themselves be recycled into products for use by the construction industry. This brings us to Trident Park. If you've ever driven from Cardiff Bay towards the docks, you've seen the big curved white building next to the overpass. Then you've seen the facility that helps manage the waste from the majority of the population of Wales. You can see in this picture just how near to the centre of Cardiff Trident Park actually is. On the left of the picture is the Senedd and the edge of Roldale Place where all the restaurants are. And towards the top of the picture is the Principality Stadium and the rest of the city centre. Trident Park accepts municipal, that's your council collected waste, the rubbish lorries you might see, as part of two major contracts. Project Green covers the local authorities of Cardiff, Newport, Monmouthshire, Caerphilly and the Vale of Glamorgan. Tomorrow's Valley includes RCT, Merthyr Tydfil, Blaen y Gwent and Torfaen. These 25-year contracts send 100% of the residual non-recyclable waste, remember that's your black bag waste, from a total of around 1.6 million people. That's just over half of Wales's 3.1 million population. And this is waste that otherwise would have been buried in landfill. And here we can see the headline figures for the Trident Park facility. We can process up to around 425,000 tonnes of waste per year. We use it as a fuel to generate and export 35 megawatts of electricity every hour to the national grid. We have two processing lines at Trident Park, both capable of processing around 25 tonnes each per hour. This is the same as about a full articulated lorries worth of waste per line, per hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we're incredibly proud that 100% of our processed byproducts can themselves be sent on to be recycled. And this, you can see here, an illustration of the process that's used at Trident Park. In points 1 to 3, you can see the residual non-recyclable waste is being collected from your house by your local authority and brought to Trident Park. Once here, it's emptied into our fuel bunker. You can see in this picture the size of the tipping hall and the fuel bunker. There are 3 tipping bays that can accommodate up to 6 vehicles, and the bunker can hold just over 13,000 tonnes and has 2 large crane-mounted claws that continually mix the waste and load into the hoppers for each process line. Here you can see the combustion part of the process. Waste is loaded into the hopper and dropped onto a sloped furnace grate. The furnace burns at around 1,200 degrees centigrade, ensuring complete combustion. Waste is now acting as the fuel. This means that we don't use fuel to burn the waste, we burn the waste as a fuel. And you can see here the inclined slope of the furnace grate and how gravity helps pull the waste down through the flames where it is combusted. Those racking bars that you can see on the left in that picture are constantly moving upwards against the slope to push the waste back uphill. This ensures that the waste spends long enough on the grate and automatically falls off it once it's been fully burned. The nozzles you can see are part of the emissions management system. Pellets of urea are fired into the furnace and react to reduce the NOx gases created by combustion. It's a little bit like AdBlue in a car engine. Once the fuel has been completely combusted, we call it IBA, or incinerator bottom ash. This material still has plenty of use and goes through a sieving and magnetic sorting process to remove recyclable metals and send them on for reprocessing. The IBA is then collected by a company called Day Group Limited, and non-magnetic metals are removed for recycling. It goes through further sorting and grading, and the resulting material is sold for use in road construction. This part of the process is where thermal energy is extracted from combustion gases and where emissions are monitored and controlled at Trident Park. The combustion gases rise into the boiler and pass over pipes carrying water flowing in the opposite direction. The gases heat up the pipes, which in turn heats up the water inside to approximately 400 degrees centigrade, converting it to superheated steam. Temperature controls prevent dioxin gases forming as they would in an uncontrolled combustion process. You can see in the diagram the overall process of the combustion gases, as well as the different stages of thermal energy extraction. And in this picture, you can kind of get a feel for how that diagram translates into a working machine. On the right-hand side, you can just about see the big green sloped furnace. The gases rise up and then travel towards the left-hand side of the screen through the boiler, which is just kind of at the top there. You can see just the underside of it. Once the thermal energy has been extracted, the combustion gases enter the lab loop. This is where powdered activated carbon and calcium hydroxide, or hydrated lime, are added. This stage neutralizes acids present in the gases and bonds particles like heavy metals, etc. This powdery mixture, called air pollution control residue, or APCR, is then captured by an array of industrial bag filters. The remaining gases are continually sampled and monitored and are then released by the stack and into the atmosphere. The levels of any remaining gases or particles are strictly controlled and monitored to ensure that they meet the level set out in our Natural Resources Wales environmental permit. You can see here the storage silos for the carbon and hydrated lime powders, as well as just the edge of the bag filter array on the right-hand side of the image. The APCR that is captured by the bag filters is stored and collected by a company called OCO Technology Limited. They use an accelerated carbonation process that captures carbon dioxide and solidifies the APCR into a concrete-like material. This is then used to form building blocks like the one in this picture. You can see the clumps of activated carbon, lime and other material trapped and solidified within the block. These are then sold for use in construction. The final part of the process sees the superheated steam generated in the boiler sent to the turbine and used to turn the blades at around 6,000 RPM. This generates 40 megawatts per hour of electricity. We use about 5 on site for the machines and various other processes, and then 35 megawatts of electricity is exported to the national grid for use in businesses and households every hour. The spent steam is cooled in the air-cooled condenser, which acts a bit like a huge car radiator, and it's sent back into the boiler structure. The combustion gases and the steam never touch, and the steam is used over and over again in a closed loop. Viridor is working closely with Welsh Government and also with Cardiff Council to develop the Cardiff Heat Network. Heat generated at Trident Park will be used to provide indoor heating solutions for public buildings, such as the Senedd building and the Millennium Centre. Once up and running, private businesses can also benefit from the local heat network infrastructure. Thank you for listening to what's a really brief whistle-stop overview of the Trident Park process. When it becomes possible again, we'd love to invite you to come and visit the site, have a full tour of the plant and see it working for yourself. For now though, thank you very much for listening, and please do take this opportunity to ask some questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eamon, for your fabulous presentation and sharing the details. I would like to encourage everybody who's attending this evening to ask some questions. You can use the question and answer, the icon with 2 speech bubbles. You click on that, you will see the dialogue box and you can pose questions there. I'd really like to encourage everyone to do that. I'm sure that there's a lot of information that you've given out, Eamon, but I know that people attending this evening, just like on Tuesday evening, will have questions for you. So I'd really like to encourage people to put the questions in now. So while we're waiting, I mean, I remember there was some questions on Tuesday, as I said, that came up. So perhaps I'll just sort of pose one of those for you first of all to get the ball rolling while people submit their questions. We had a question on Tuesday that related to carbon dioxide emissions, and I think so. That question was around carbon dioxide emissions in terms of that attendee having heard that there were energy from waste facilities, you know, release high concentrations of carbon dioxide. And they asked very much what Viridor is planning to do about this, if there are any plans at all. So if you could launch off with that one, that would be a good one, I think. Yeah, absolutely. So the thing to remember about energy recovery and carbon dioxide is that, yes, energy recovery processes like the one at Trident Park is not a carbon neutral process. It does emit carbon dioxide. Now, there are kind of 2 key things to discuss around that. The first one is kind of discussing the alternative a little bit. So this is waste that, had it not come to Trident Park, would have gone to landfill, and open landfills in the UK generate something called landfill gas, which is a mixture of carbon dioxide and methane. And that mixture of carbon dioxide and methane as a gas is around 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than just carbon dioxide on its own. So certainly when compared to the alternative, which is sending this non-recyclable material to landfill, energy recovery processes are certainly by a massive margin the less impactful choice. So this is very much the more responsible choice in terms of those 2 alternatives. The second thing is that Viridor very much kind of recognises that we are uniquely placed to do something about climate change in terms of the processes that we operate. So Viridor has kind of launched our carbon ambition,
which is to be carbon neutral by 2040 and carbon net negative by 2045. And what we mean by that is to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that's being emitted from our fleet of ERFs, and then to actually be kind of net negative, so be capturing more carbon and kind of dealing with more carbon than we would emit by 2045. And the way that we want to do that, really, we need your help to do it, because through sampling the waste that we use in our plants and monitoring the emissions and all sorts of other things that our carbon team is doing, what we know is that about 50% of our carbon emissions come from what's called anthropogenic carbon sources. And really what we mean by that are man-made carbon sources. Man-made plastics is what we really mean. The vast majority of that material is man-made plastics. And that's plastics that have come from basically hydrocarbons, oil. Now, what we know, and it's, we can all hold our hands up a little bit. What we know is that there are a lot of plastics that are making their way from my house, from your house, from all of our houses, and making their way into the non-recyclable waste stream. Now, what that means is that we could all be a bit better at recycling that plastic, especially that hard plastic. Yeah, and we're talking about food containers, we're talking about drinks bottles. You can probably think yourself, oh yeah, there's a couple of those bits in my black bag, I know there are. And really what we need to do is we all need to be working a bit better as residents, as householders, as business people, as employees, and making sure that we are doing that, putting in that extra bit of effort to make sure that in the first place, we're not putting that material into our black bin, into our non-recyclable bin, but also when we do put that material into our recycling bins, we're doing it properly. And we're doing it in a way that the councils where we live can take that material on to be recycled. So making sure that it's clean or cleanish, making sure that it's not combined with other materials and can be separated properly, make sure that it's not being kind of tainted by with, could be chemicals or paint or food or whatever it is. So there are things that we can do to bring down the amount of anthropogenic carbon that's coming into Trident Park. And that's going to be one major factor in reducing our carbon dioxide emissions. The other thing is that Viridor is currently, as we speak, researching and investing into carbon capture technology. So our plan is to develop this technology in partnership with another business, and we are going to retrofit it onto our largest facility, which is called Runcorn, and that's kind of just north of Liverpool. And the idea is we're going to capture the carbon coming from their stacks, re-liquefy it, and then pump it back into the spent gas wells in the Irish Sea. So you can kind of think of it as putting the carbon dioxide back where it came from, which is a really kind of ingenious idea. And once that technology has kind of been worked through at Runcorn, the plan is for it to come to Trident Park. And we will be using the same technology to capture carbon at Trident Park. So I hope that kind of gives an idea of the sort of the realities around carbon dioxide and ERFs, especially at Trident Park. So I hope that's a deep enough answer for you.
Thank you very much, Eamon. And I think so you've sort of touched on plastics already, and we've had a question from somebody who I imagine is a very diligent, at recycling, and they've asked a really good question that I'd like to put to you. So it says, and I'm just going to read it out, I'm always careful to cut up plastic rings from bottles, etc., in case it ends up in the environment and injures wildlife. Are you saying I don't need to worry because it all gets combusted? I think that's quite a really interesting question to ask.
That's a really good question. That's a really good question, because actually what you're doing already is really good. It's really good. And for two main reasons. The first thing is you're already putting a lot of effort into what you do with your plastic waste. and you've already had to think about what you need to do with it, cutting up the little plastic. I assume we're talking about the little ring kind of at the top of the neck of the bottle. Is that what we're talking about? Or perhaps the container rings for a couple of them perhaps. But yeah, cutting them up. So the first thing is that if in the transport from your house to the material recycling facility, if you're putting them in your recycling bag, they will go to a material recycling facility. We call them MRFs for short. But so if they go to a MRF, then that transport, it's entirely possible. You've put the recycling bag out on a Thursday night or a Tuesday night or whatever it is. You might have some little furry friends which are kind of, worrying the bag a little bit, and that plastic bottle might fall out, or that little ring might fall out. You've done the exact right thing by cutting it up and making sure that something's not going to get trapped in there and so on. The second part of your question, if for whatever reason that plastic bottle hasn't gone to recycling for whatever reason, and my message to you is it absolutely should. So we want to make sure that you can cut up that little ring and kind of make sure it's as safe as possible and kind of make sure it gets to the recycling facility where it needs to go. But if for whatever reason it comes to Trident Park, so perhaps it's gone in the wrong bin, or perhaps it's one of the public bins and somebody hasn't quite popped it in the right one, and it comes to Trident Park, what you can stop worrying about is that it's a total treatment solution. So there isn't anything that leaves Trident Park that resembles the waste that came in at all. So the only things that leave Trident Park as waste byproducts are the IBA, which has been completely combusted and is now inert, and that goes to be reprocessed for the recyclable metals and be sieved and graded and processed into the construction material for road bedding, for kind of like the substrate layer of roads, or the APCR, so that powdery residue that's turned into those carbon negative building blocks. So what you don't have to worry about is that if by accident that bottle was to come here, it's not making its way then into the environment in order to pose a choking danger to wildlife. That's not what happens at Trident Park. So you're absolutely right. Let's get that plastic bottle recycled. That's the first thing. But if it was to come here, if there was some sort of confluence of events and it's managed to make its way here, then it's not making its way into the environment in that way. So
thank you very much.
Really good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. Great. Yeah. So the person's doing the right thing. That's wonderful. So we've had another good question as well, and that is about the OCO blocks, and wanting to know a little bit more detail. So what are they made of in terms of the actual block itself? So perhaps you could expand on some information around those blocks a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm going to do, I'm going to beg your forgiveness for a second because I've got one literally just out of reach. So I'm going to disappear just for 2 seconds. So here is one of the OCO carbon negative building blocks. And what I've done is I've asked the engineering department just to take some slices from it. And you can see here that it's kind of been broken in half, so you can see into the middle of it, a bit more kind of clearly. So what happens to the OCO blocks is that APCR material is collected. We've got two big silos, so one for each process line. We've got two big silos, and that material is collected from the inside of the bag filter array. So what's happening is those combustion gases are passing through the lab loop, and we are firing this powder into that lab loop. The lab loop is, so the pipes themselves are massive. They're absolutely gigantic. And then we compress them down so that they're passing through a dimension space that's about that, a little bit big, about that. And then because the gas is compressed, that is the most efficient place for us to fire the powder into, because it's much more compressed. It can react much more efficiently. So we're firing the hydrated lime powder in. That's neutralizing the acidic gases which are present. And then the activated carbon powder it's kind of quite clever stuff. What's happening is because it's activated carbon, heavy metals and other compounds and material are adsorbing onto the surface of the carbon molecule. Now, and that's kind of trapping it in place. But what you've got now is you've got kind of powdery combustion gases. So that passes through a big industrial bag filter. And the way to think about it is a really, really massively engineered kind of Hoover bag, really. And we kind of blow it into the bag filter. It's slightly over pressure so that it is making maximum contact with the bag filter array, and it passes through a number of them. So it doesn't just get filtered once, it gets filtered a number of times. And what happens is those bags are constantly agitated, and the powder falls down and we collect it into this big silo. Tanker trucks come, they collect the material, they collect the APCR, and it's kind of like a grey, off-grey kind of powder, really. Gets collected and it's taken off to OCO. Now, OCO use a carbonation process, so they are adding carbon dioxide into this block. And what happens is that reacts with the hydrated lime and it solidifies. Exact same way that something like concrete works, cement works. So that solidifies and it traps all of the material into that block. So you can see just here that you've got bits of kind of wood chip and other material that's trapped in the,
sorry,
block.
Eamon, it will have to be right in front of you. You have to be behind it, otherwise it disappears. That's it. Yeah.
So we're trying something new, and I haven't rehearsed this bit, so there we are. So you've got the, you can see the kind of black activated carbon. You can see the kind of off-white, grey kind of hydrated lime, and then you can see all sorts of other material in the matrix. So what happens is that gets pressed, put into the block molds, and you've got building blocks, and they're sold as carbon negative building blocks because you've had to add carbon dioxide, which chemically reacts with the hydrated lime, locking it in place. So in this block, you've got carbon dioxide, which is locked in place chemically. So hopefully that kind of gives a little bit more detail as to what's going on there.
Fantastic, Eamon. Really bringing that kind of visual impact, I think, of the process to life. And I think one of the things that can be added to those blocks is some wood chip. So that's wood that's been used, and it's a kind of recycling of that process because they can add in some more natural fibres. Sometimes you can see them in the blocks, can't you? I think yeah, I think so. We have got just well, there's a few questions that have come in which are around a sort of similar topic. So I think this is going to be the last question this evening, Eamon. Yeah, it's really around recycling again. And the question is there any sorting of the rubbish before it comes to site or on the site itself? So if you could talk, and I'll bring those three or four questions together as the last one of this evening. If you could talk around that, please.
Okie doke, not a problem. That's a really good question because it's something that, to be honest, we don't really think an awful lot about. We kind of, if we're really being honest, we, especially where I live in RCT, we kind of, we put all our recycling in that bag, we put our green waste in that bag, and we put our non-recycling kind of black bin bag out in a separate bin, and that's the last we think about it. We put it out on a Thursday night or a Monday night or whatever it is, and you kind of don't really think about it again. So that first part of the question, is there any sorting of the waste when it arrives at Trident Park? And the answer really is no, with a but. So we're not doing any real sorting of the waste here. What happens is that RCV, refuse collection vehicle, so that bin lorry that comes down your street, if you live in Cardiff or Vale of Glamorgan, that bin lorry leaves your street and drives directly here. So we have those RCVs, those bin lorries, coming directly into the plant. They back up into the tipping hall, and then they lift and they tip straight into the fuel bunker. Now, what happens with the other local authorities, your waste will go somewhere first, be packed up, put into articulated lorries and brought here en masse because it's a bit more convenient than having thousands of bin lorries all trying to get here every morning. So in terms of sorting, really, we're relying on you to do a lot of the sorting in your kitchen, in your garage, making sure those recyclables are going into the correct recycling bins for whatever local authority you live in, and really making sure the right stuff goes in the right bin. So it's only non-recyclable waste, the stuff we cannot do anything else with. We've seen if we can reuse it. We've seen if we can, reduce it and not have got it in the first place. We can see if we can recycle it, and whatever's left, that's what goes in your black bin bag. That comes here. Now, the thing that we do at Trident Park is we are continually searching. So our FROs, our fuel reception operatives, they work in the tipping hall. They're constantly on the lookout for bulky waste. So that's, if you can imagine, you go to your local tip or household waste recycling centres, what they're really called, but you go to your local tip and someone's left, I don't know, like a chair, or someone's been really clever and they've managed to stuff a whole bed into the non-recyclable bin. You kind of see that stuff quite often. They haven't really gone to the effort to break it down properly, put the wood in the wood and so on and so forth. So they've stuffed something really big in there. That arrives at Trident Park. First thing we do, the FROs pull that out, not by hand. They've got machines, they've got grab cranes and bucket loaders and all sorts of things. So they'll pull that out. If it's made of things that are in our environmental permit that we're allowed to receive, then they'll shred it and put it into the fuel bunker. But we've got a whole list of things which are either not environmentally appropriate for us to receive. That's things like paint. So we're not allowed to, we don't receive paint here, we don't burn paint. And there's a whole list of other things which are not in our environmental permit to receive. And then there are things which are hazardous. So those are things that are hazardous to health, full stop. So we don't take things like asbestos. We don't take things like kind of untreated chemicals and acids and all sorts of things like that. We also don't take batteries because they're kind of hazardous, A, in themselves, because they're full of alkalis and acids, but also they're hazardous to the process. Because if you think, whenever you post something in the post office, they ask you, were there any batteries in there? And it's because if that was to kind of get bent or broken or pierced, the chemicals inside the battery can ignite. Now you can imagine how much of a nightmare it would be, if you've got something like your phone and in the RCB, it gets compressed, it gets bent, the battery inside splits open, and it's at the bottom of the RCV, starts to burn, starts to smolder. The staff, the refuse workers who are driving the lorries and putting the stuff, they don't know because it's inside a bag somewhere. You've got a fire hazard there, a mobile fire hazard. Or it gets to Trident Park, it goes in the fuel bunker, and we don't know until you lift up that pipe, you lift up that load ready to go in the hopper, it's on fire. And then you've got a kind of a hazardous emergency there. So we absolutely do not want batteries in your non-recyclable waste. The good thing is that your batteries can be pretty readily recycled. If you've got a kind of a small to medium business, 60 employees or more, then there will be battery recycling there. There's little kind of bins they've got and you just post them in and they're taken away and they're recycled properly. Supermarkets will have them. A lot of smaller places will have them as well. So the good news is for things like that, they're very readily recyclable. And if there's anything that you're kind of not sure about, take it to your local HWRC, Household Waste Recycling Centre, what we used to call the council tip. Take it there. The staff working there will tell you where to put it. They will know and they will tell you where to put that material. If it's paint, you put it in the paint. If it's soil, you put it in the soil, and so on and so forth. I hope that's the kind of answer that you're looking for and that you've got the information you're looking for. All it leaves for me to do is say on behalf of myself and Jess, I'd really like to thank you for attending our CADW Open Doors event. We hope that you've enjoyed yourself and that some of your questions have been answered. Just a reminder that it is National Recycling Week next week, so it's worth having a look on your local authority website or their social media and looking for the details of any events that they may be having. If you do want a more in-depth look at our ERF process, we've got the Viridor ERF virtual tour, and that includes a lot of interactive and video content. So if you just search for Viridor virtual tour in any of the major search engines, that will pop up and you can click through to that. So all it leaves for me to do is thank you for coming. We hope to see you again really soon on site for a tour, and just say goodbye and good evening.